Welcome and hello. Let's talk about Shadowdark. I've been running two Shadowdark campaigns side by side for the past 6 months, and I've really become a big fan of this game. Now, I adore the 1980s TSR dungeon crawling experience. I love the old versions of Dungeons and Dragons. Today we will call that an OSR experience. Shadowdark for a modern game does a really good job of delivering an OSR experience. It'll use things like 5th edition style character attributes, advantage, disadvantage, bounded accuracy, 5e style ability checks or skill checks. It has a really innovative roll to cast mechanic that's a lot different than spell memorization, which you have in the older editions. But it does a few things that drive this OSR style experience really well. And I thought that would make an interesting video. Kelsey, the designer for Shadowdark, she had a huge 5e following before her Kickstarter. And I feel like a lot of people who have picked up Shadowdark were actually former 5e players. This is their first foray or their gateway into the OSR experience. So I thought it'd be an interesting thing to talk about, like what's different, what do we do differently in old school Dungeons and Dragons. First, about me. Hello, I'm John, your host. Welcome to my channel. I've had a pen and paper blog for a long time. This is my first time on YouTube. I've been a dungeon master since 1980. These are the editions I've spent the most time with, first edition and basic D&D. So yeah, I'm on the old side. So the first thing, let's talk about resource management. And to understand resource management, let's put yourselves in an old school dungeon. Your party has descended maybe beneath an old ruined castle. It's pitch black. The only thing separating you from darkness is your torchlight. The dungeon's full of monsters that want to murder and eat you. There's traps and puzzles. Getting trapped in an old school dungeon is a very real thing. There are chutes and slides that will drop you to a different level. Iron bars could fall behind your group. There could be a cave-in. Rock walls slide and block the way out. All these things are designed to test the players, and especially the players' planning. Did you bring the right stuff? Do you have enough lights like torches and lanterns and lantern oil to survive a long stay in the dungeon? Do you have food and water? Will you have like a rope, a grappling hook, a crowbar when you need it? And Shadowdark does a number of things to encourage this resource-focused style of gameplay. The first thing, no character races or no player options. In Shadowdark, they're called ancestries. So no ancestries have dark vision. That means everybody in the game needs torches and lanterns to be able to see once you get into the dungeon. There's going to be that guy who's like, dwarves live underground. I'm a big Tolkien fan. I probably haven't reread the books since high school. Peter Jackson's made me lazy, right? Every time I've got an itch, it's like, oh, let's fire up Fellowship of the Ring again. But over the holidays, I was just rereading The Hobbit. And the thing that struck me about this again and again, you've got the wood elves live in caves underneath Mirkwood. You've got the dwarves, whether they're in the goblin lair or underground with the dragon. They all need torches and light. So even in Tolkien, elves and dwarves and hobbits, they all need light sources. The other thing, though, about resource management, it's got to be easy to track. Everything we're talking about here in game terms translates to something called encumbrance. How much carrying capacity does each player character have? And when the group is planning before the adventure, how much capacity does the whole group have? Shadowdark has done a really good job of making this simple. It's right on the front of the character sheet. It's listed as equipment slots. Your number of slots are equal to your strength score. Fighters get a few more slots. When you look up equipment on the equipment table, it tells you how many slots the equipment takes up. It's a very simple, intuitive system. Just a few weeks ago, we had a convention here in the Philadelphia area, and I ran 3 tables of Shadowdark. over the course of the convention. The players were all 5e players. They were brand new to OSR style gameplay. So this is their first time experiencing resource management. Of course, I was running a dungeon crawl. You could explain to people, these are your slots, this is what goes in there, this is what you have left over. It's very, very intuitive and simple. The third thing Shadowdark does in this resource management space is it introduces a torch timer. What this is, so when the players are like, we're going into the dungeon and I light my torch. To me, that's a trigger. Get out my phone, set a 1 hour timer, put my phone off to the side. It's 7:25. I know at 8:25 p.m. the torch is going out. So their light sources are tied to real world time, not game time. It's weird. And when I first experienced this, I said, oh, this is a gimmick. I can see myself getting rid of this really quickly. As a referee, you have to track in-game time. I need to know how many turns players are doing stuff in the dungeon, because there's wandering monsters, there's other kinds of things to track. How long is a spell going to last, for instance? So you have to track time as a referee. Light is just one more thing to track. Why would I use this torch timer? But I noticed something interesting start to happen. Maybe the players are in a room, they're trying to decide which way to go, they're debating, and there's always that guy who's like, guys, we've been talking about this for 10 minutes. Like, we're burning torch. Or gamers are cracking jokes and people are laughing, they get distracted. Someone's gonna say, guys, we gotta get back to this. We're burning torch. So the torch timer introduces a little bit of positive pressure to keep the game moving. And as a referee, that's a good thing. I usually play with 5 or 6 players in each of my campaigns. Shadowdark, it has a very, very efficient action economy overall. Combat moves really quickly, and that's good. It's good to keep people engaged. The torch timer also does a good job of keeping people focused. Yeah, you have very limited encumbrance slots. People are not going to be carrying that many light sources. It forces, or encourages, I should say, it encourages the players to be efficient and to keep the game moving. And this doesn't happen very often, maybe one every 3 or 4 game sessions. Something's happening at the table. Maybe it's a boss fight or a really important room, or overwhelming numbers of monsters, but everybody is leaning in and they're really hyper focused on the situation in the game, and all the players forget that there's this thing over here going click, 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 counting down, and the middle of combat, and the torch goes out. And if you think it was a stressful situation a few minutes ago, now when the lights are out, that's when the screaming and the panic really starts. Anyway, it's pretty funny to experience if you're the referee. So at first I thought the torch was a gimmick, but after 5-6 months of using it, I'm behind. I'm on team torch timer now. All right, the next OSR type pillar to talk about with Shadowdark, I would call it experience for treasure, XP for treasure. People will do what they're rewarded to do. And if the player characters will get more powerful and their characters will level up if they find treasure, well, guess what? When they get into a dungeon, they're gonna look for treasure. That's the type of gameplay we want to encourage in an old school game. We want player characters to explore. We're very focused on an exploration style of gameplay. And it's subtle, but this informs what the referee is doing in between sessions. We're building wilderness hex crawls, or we're building dungeons with lots of interesting things to explore and interact with. There's still story. There's still a narrative that gets people out of the town and out to the dungeon. Like, oh no, grandma's been captured by a troll. Can we get out to the troll lair and find her before she's thrown in a cauldron and eaten? So there's still a narrative that gets the players to the dungeon. But then when they get out there, maybe they rescue grandma, they're going to say, well, while we're here, let's look around. Maybe there's a treasure down that other way. or something like that. And that's the kind of gameplay loop we want to encourage. Likewise, resource management and XP for treasure, they kind of complement each other because there's this pressure or maybe an incentive to bring as much stuff with you as you can. You don't want to run out of light sources, but you also need to have gear slots open to be able to carry stuff out of the dungeon too. All right, now lots of old school games do experience for treasure. That's not unique to Shadowdark. What Shadowdark does that's unique is it's massively simplified the experience system. Characters that are going from first to second level need 10 experience points to level up. To go from level 2 to level 3, you need 20 experience points. And the rules give very simple guidelines on how to measure treasure. So most treasures characters are going to find their 1 experience point. Great, find 10 of them, you guys can level up. But it's very easy at the table in real time just to say, you guys have opened up a chest, you're collecting the treasure, there's a magic sword, that's 3 experience points, and just notate it right there in real time. The last pillar of OSR style play I want to talk about has to do with random dice rolls. For a 5e player coming over, the biggest adjustment is going to be character generation, right? In a 5e game or a modern game, you're typically using some kind of default stat array or a point buy, and you're perfectly lining up your character attributes the way you want them to be. There's a big culture of character optimization with modern D&D, trying to figure out optimal pairings of race and class or species and class, and even planning out a career arc for your character, like, oh, I'm going to be 3 levels of warlock and then dip into paladin. There's no planning in an old school game. We call it roll 3d6 down the line, like roll 3 dice, that's your strength, roll 3 dice, that's your intelligence, your wisdom. You're sort of discovering your character through random dice rolls and then figuring out what works well for them. Why do you have a fighter that has a poor dexterity but like is super brainy, for instance? So OSR characters, they are more grounded. They'll have flaws and characteristics that feel a lot differently than a planned character. The thing Shadowdark does differently, and I haven't seen any other OSR or actually any game otherwise do, so it might be unique to Shadowdark, is random advancement. All right, so imagine like the 5e fighter table. Everybody knows level 1 you get second wind. At level 2 all fighters get their action surge. At level 3 I think you might get your first ability score improvement. Maybe that's level 4. But it's a table and it's planned. In a game like Shadowdark, you get class talents or class abilities at levels 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, but it's rolled. It's random. So after the fact, you're like, why did I get stronger? I guess I've been going to the gym. After seeing 2 campaigns for a period of time, the thing I've noticed the most is how the very same character type can diverge depending on those roles. I've had 2 fighters in the games. One, he does in fact keep getting stronger. So he went from a regular dude to now he's like, I'm the Rock Johnson now. The other fighter, he's just gotten better with bows, and then he was better with swords, and then better with axes, and he's slowly becoming a weapon master, even though physically he's not getting buff. That's really interesting, that level of, I guess, diversification just coming from what looks like a really simple level table. I'll give you one more example. We had a thief. He's dead now, but he did have a glorious career while he was alive. Every time he leveled up, he just rolled backstab. Before you knew it, he had backstab damage times 4. And as you can imagine, in play, all that guy would do is, all right, how do I sneak around, get into position, and stab them in the back? It was really goofy, but also really interesting, and it all came about randomly. So that's an aspect of old school games I love, like the random characters and the random way like story emerges through play when you're playing an old school game. And Shadowdark does a really interesting thing with this random character advancement. All right, I think this is enough for my first video. Hopefully this has given you some ideas, both just on how old school play differs and what Shadowdark brings to the table. Thanks for watching. If you appreciated this, as they say, like, subscribe, drop a comment. I don't think this will be my last video, so if you subscribe, you'll see when I post another one. Thank you for being here.